Effective internal communication is critical for productivity and engagement, and yet 60% of employees find their updates unengaging, leading to misalignment. To succeed in the ever-evolving, ever-crowded messaging space, communications professionals have to rethink their strategies, and lots of articles are starting to come out with all of the new priorities and trends expected in the year 2025. To talk with me today about that is Debbie DeWitt, Marketing Communications Manager for Visix. Hi, Debbie. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Derek. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. As always, I'd like to thank all of you for listening as well. I remind you that you can subscribe and review us, and you can follow along with a transcript on the Visix website. Whether you're using digital signage or not, our podcast gives you practical tips for communications and content to better engage your audience. I'm Derek DeWitt. Welcome to Digital Signage Done Right. So before we get into this year, 2025, can you give us some advice on how communications professionals or digital signage managers can take stock of last year?
Yeah, I'd take a look at a few things and definitely keep these in mind as you consider your strategy for 2025. The first is to evaluate your audience engagement from last year. I mean, obviously you need to identify who you're reaching and, more importantly, any gaps.
Yeah, I'd say this is probably the single most important thing you should do.
Yeah, definitely. You also want to review your different channels, evaluate the effectiveness of different communication methods you're using, whether it's digital signage, intranet, social media, email, what's working, what's not. I'd also look at internal versus external messaging. You need to assess that internal alignment with what you're telling customers on the outside.
Right. Make sure you're saying the same thing to your employees that you're saying to the general public or customers or whatever.
Right. Yeah, everybody needs to be on the same page.
Right.
You'll want to identify key messages. You probably had different goals last year than you'll have this year. So go back and take a look at those goals from last year when you're prioritizing the goals for 2025. And I will say when you do that, both reviewing last year and looking at this year, go ahead and get lots of people involved, the different departments and teams who contributed.
Right. And whatever your overall company goals are, or maybe you have a SWOT analysis or something like that, that can also help drive that effort.
Yeah, definitely. And that'll also help you look at your resources and your budget. You're going to have to look at what people do you need? Do you need software? Do you need hardware? You got to budget for those needs right up front, and taking a look at what you spent last year, especially if you've got something like subscriptions or recurring, fees, you're going to want to look at that. Also, we talk about measuring results a lot, so you need to consider how you're going to measure success. Obviously, you're going to want to look at your ROI from last year, and you can use that to define this year's metrics of how you'll measure success.
Right. You might actually even need to adjust what you're measuring or how you're measuring it, because maybe you were measuring the wrong thing.
Yeah, that actually happens a lot. And looking at the last thing, I'd say crisis or change readiness. Were there any curveballs that happened last year that threw your whole communications game off? Yeah. Curveballs, you can't plan for them, but you could look at how did you handle that situation? Could you do it better? Build in some flexibility for any unseen risks or things that might pop up this year.
Yeah, as I like to say, agility is key in the 21st century. Okay, so as we move into this year, you got some predictions. Where do you get them from? Are you just coming up with these from your own sage wisdom or what?
Yes, I am an oracle. No, there are lots and lots and lots and lots of articles out there. So literally just Google internal communications 2025 and you'll get a little taste of all of this. So what I did is went in, kind of reviewed a bunch of things and made up my own role. We'll reference some specific sources and we'll put links in the transcript for those.
Okay. Is there much difference between the priorities you saw last year and the ones you see this year? Because, we did an episode about communication trends for internal comms in 2024. Do you see a lot of changes coming, or is it still pretty much the same old playbook, but, faster?
I think there's a lot of crossover in the topics. And actually, that's from both 2024 and even back to 2023. So some of the continuing themes from back 2 years ago that we had are the impact of hybrid workplaces. That's still resonating out there. Leadership communications, focus on employee wellness, which, we just did a episode about wellness messaging, so that's still top of mind. Definitely making messages more visual continues to be a trend, and data and analytics. I think that's never going away.
Yeah, that's for sure. And all of those things are valid this year as well, I think. And then last year, we saw more things crop up. There was more of a focus on what's being called the employee experience, which is a more sort of holistic way of approaching how people are responding to their communications. Obviously, the use of AI, and we're starting to enter this world of personalization, which is going to develop, whether you like it or not, into a world of hyper-personalization. Obviously, making content more engaging, building trust in leadership also really came to the forefront last year, and communication security has become a big topic because it seems like every other day things are going wonky with our online communications, and you need to be prepared for that.
Yeah, as technology grows and becomes more complex, so do the number of trolls and people trying to force their way and take advantage of those things.
Yeah, that's for sure. Now, obviously, since workplaces are still undergoing significant changes due to all these digital transformations and hybrid models and this plethora of new channels and tech tools out there, it makes sense, I think, that these are obviously going to continue into the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I don't see any of the things we just mentioned, or quite frankly, going back and listening to those episodes like I did, none of those things from 2023, 2024, or quite frankly, what we're about to talk about for this year are going to go away. I think a lot of it's been normalized, like hybrid work. When we first talked about it, there were about, 15,000 articles. What is hybrid? And we even wrote some of those, I'll admit. Yes. But I think it's been normalized, but a lot of these things are being fine-tuned. They're all still in play, but it's, now that we understand them better, how can we optimize for them?
And we've seen them play out for a little while in the real world, and so we can start to come up with reasonable adaptation scenarios. Okay, so what's top of mind for internal communications professionals right now?
Well, a report from Workshop that I found says there are several top things that communication professionals say they're experiencing. Manager and frontline communications are the top two priorities in 2025 for a lot of people. We've talked about this before. It can't just be the C-suite pushing things out. It can't just be HR or marketing or the digital signage manager pushing things out. They have to be pushed all the way through and down. So your managers and those frontline communications are big priorities. 85% of internal communicators said they consider email their most effective channel, which is kind of heartbreaking to me, but
that's surprising.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. The good news is more teams are incorporating video and in-person events. That replaces email, which yay. As we talked about, interest in AI is at an all-time high, but people are still having some trouble figuring out how to use it best, especially for communications. But remaining the biggest challenge for internal communications professionals, measuring results.
That's for sure. I am shocked that email is still. I wonder if the reason that the workshop report got those responses is because of the age of the people that they were asking, honestly, or the age of the people who are in those managerial positions.
I think it could be a few things. It's going to depend on, obviously, the industry. It's going to depend on the age group demographics. It's going to depend on what kind of communications are we talking about? I also think it's going to depend on how are you measuring success. An email is super easy because people can reply, they can put a little thumbs up on it, and they've gotten it and read it. But if you're not actually measuring some of your other channels as effectively, you actually won't know if they're making an impact.
That's all very true. So we've also got something from PR Daily called 7 Internal Communications Trends. So let's go through those one at a time. I'll start off with mentioning what they are, and then you can expand on that.
Let's riff.
Let's riff. The first one is streamlining communication channels. So communication teams are trying to optimize and reduce communication channels, either the number of ones that they use or their kind of footprint, if you will, in order to improve efficiencies.
Yeah, we talked about this a lot when, hybrid and agile workplaces first popped up. A lot of people, especially during the pandemic, a lot of people jumped on Teams, Zoom. We're going to have messaging apps. We're going to have an intranet. We're going to have digital signage. We're going to have all these things. And now people are trying to streamline that, figure out what works, what doesn't. A lot of people still use email as their main medium, like we talked about. But I think we're going to see more personalization, even of emails, because that'll get greater engagement. And as we talked about, putting more visual and video elements are also going to be more common. But I think that as they're using all of these messaging platforms, collaboration apps, intranets, internal newsletters, in-person events, there's a lot to coordinate. So streamlining is going to be critical.
Yeah, and all that stuff takes time, people, and money, It's also a lot of strategy planning and quite a fair amount of creative work, not to mention work on the part of the employees to actually have to read all this stuff and digest it and figure out how much of it applies to them. So yeah, I think streamlining is going to be key, and I think it'll be appreciated by the audience.
Yeah, and I think people have been doing this for a couple of years, and I think we're just going to see people kind of fine-tune those tools, but also I think we're going to see vendors who create those tools start to streamline, start to unify, maybe add more features so you can drop that other app.
Right. Now, saying all that, number 2 on the list is experimenting with new mediums. Okay. So yeah, streamlining, absolutely. But people are also experimenting with and integrating new formats like, internal podcasts, not for the public, but just for employees, or digital signage is an obvious one to reach employees in new ways.
Yeah, and the technology might not be new. I mean, we've all had podcasts forever. I mean, some of your employees are listening to podcasts right now. Why not make it yours? So both of those ideas of, the podcasts and digital signs, they may not be new to you, but they're new to your employees. And I will say they both are great ideas for like a hybrid workplace because people can also tune into those things from home.
Yeah, that's true. Kind of at their own pace, which I always like the buffet version of communications. Now, of course, you have to be careful with all this. And this is, I think, also one of the motivators for that streamlining initiative is the third item here is addressing information overload. We just have a ton of stuff all the time coming at us. A lot of that stuff that we've chosen or that because we can't be bothered to fiddle with our settings on whatever platforms we're using, we just kind of get anyway. And now here comes my company or my school or even my hospital just throwing tons of stuff at me. This could really overwhelm people, and that could cause them to struggle to engage with things that maybe they need to engage with, updates and so on. They just can't seem to prioritize because you just got too many messages coming at them from too many sources. Yeah,
and it's interesting because in one of those surveys I read, they said that solving information overload through personalization is a key priority for 43% of communicators. So they're going to personalize, whether that be through the messaging or through the medium. So in the messaging, it's going to be personalizing those emails, delivering something that's only relevant to that specific audience or individual, and maybe personalizing the information within the message to them. And then the medium is basically having things available through different sources so that people can pick and choose how they prefer to get their messages.
I think you also have to think about quantity and frequency of messaging as well.
Yeah, it's all about cutting through the noise and not adding to that noise, because burnout is a real risk, not just for your readers. Like you said, people who are designing, people who are scheduling, your creators and communicators could burn out as well.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, number 4, which ties into the thing that you said is really one of the top priorities of the year on a lot of lists, fostering leadership participation. Now, the survey showed nearly half of all internal communicators aim to improve employee communications from executives and managers this year from them. That's interesting.
Yeah, the effectiveness of messages coming from your C-suite or upper management to employees is important because, your employees take their cues from leadership. So managers and employees have to be aligned.
I know a report last year by Axios HQ said that data shows a strong link between the effectiveness of internal communications and employee alignment. The two things seem to be going hand in hand more. And this is, I think, a priority because very often they're not actually aligned, the managers and the employees. What the report showed was that 44% of leaders say they think their staff are fully aligned with the organization's goals. And then they asked the employees, and only 14% of them agreed with that. That's not alignment.
No, that's sad. And it's I'm sure it's a shock, but that makes sense because as we said on some other surveys, manager and frontline communications are the top two priorities. And my guess is those kind of stats are the reason why. Because if your managers and executives aren't using the different communication channels you've set up, if they're not actively participating and supporting your messaging, quite frankly, it gives your employees permission to just ignore it too.
Yeah, that's true. If they can't be bothered, why should I, right? And as we said before, leaders, they have to be active. And these days especially, they have to be transparent and they have to be genuine in their communication. So this is all, important stuff. Basically, hey, you know what? We're all part of the same team, so let's stop dividing us into, upper class and middle class.
Yeah, we've talked about before, there's no upstairs, downstairs, or there shouldn't be, and there shouldn't be a bunch of corporate silos.
Yeah, that's for sure. Number 5 is measuring results. I'm reminded that the workshop report that you mentioned earlier said that this is the number one challenge for internal comms, measuring results.
Yeah, a lot of people aren't doing it, or they don't want to do it, or they do want to do it, but they just don't know how. So I will say we've got other episodes on this for digital signage managers with specific sort of how-to advice on measuring success, and we'll put a few links here in the transcript. But the basics are simply establish goals, track your metrics, apply the two,
It's just not that hard.
Well, it's time consuming and it can take some process, but it's important to determine how effective your messages and campaigns are. We've talked about having an easy to measure call to action. And again, we'll put some links in here because I don't want to dive too far in that.
I know that there was a survey that showed that a third of the people who participated in it said that consistently measuring and reporting on multi-channel communications effectiveness was their top priority in 2025. I think consistency is the key phrase here. Now, 71% of the people surveyed said that the amount of internal content employees read is a high-quality indicator of the employee engagement. In short, if they're reading it, then they must be engaged, which implies that they're measuring if people are reading it.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I will just say a big flag for me is if you're using email, you literally can tell, you can say they've read it. Because again, I said, especially now with tools like Outlook, just letting you put a little thumbs up on things, they'll think, oh, great, they read it. What did you want them to do? How did you want them to respond? What action did you want them to take? That's why we always preach you need a measurable call to action. Because there's a big difference between knowing people have read something, and I would argue they might be seeing it, not necessarily.
I was just going to say that just because it's marked as read by Outlook doesn't mean they read it.
Right. That's like someone can glance at a digital sign. They saw your message. It doesn't mean that they engaged with it. So I think, like we've talked about, you need some measurable call to actions to know that people aren't just seeing, but they're reading it, they're understanding it, they're retaining that information, and then they're acting on your messages. That means they're engaged.
Right. The call to action can't be open email. Right. So number 6 is, once you have those data analytics, leveraging those data analytics. You got a bunch of information, you don't know what to do with it, well then it's kind of useless because, and I know we've said this a gazillion times, we'll say it a gazillion more, but you care about what you measure.
Absolutely. It's essential to analyze your data effectively because you need to look for trends and make data-driven decisions. And we talk a lot about data-driven decisions, but it really is true. Going with your gut feeling can sometimes work, but a lot of times your gut is wrong. You have to connect the data and the results to your goals because that way you can understand how to adapt or respond based on those findings.
And I would argue, how can you as a human being have a gut feeling about technology that's only been around for a handful of years? We didn't evolve with this stuff, It's not
even that. I know lots of examples, and I hate to say this, a lot of times it is your executives or your C-suite who just think they know their employee base, their visitors, their students, their customer base. They know them. They know what they'll like. They know what they'll respond to. When you're talking about like evaluating, A/B testing some different designs or even different channels to deliver things on, that just may not be the case. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think your audience, sir or madam, I think your audience has changed over time, and they've changed quite quickly. And I think you will be surprised if you do things like A/B testing, the things that are in fact engaging or popular. They may not be the things that are engaging or popular to you.
Yeah, and I think when we're talking about analytics, I mean, maybe your gut was right. Doesn't mean there's not room for improvement.
Yeah, that's for sure. Speaking of new technology, number 7 is embracing generative AI. Listen, if you haven't played with it at all yet, you're behind the times. You need to start goofing around with it. Research from Gartner estimates that, quote, by 2029, 80% of human decisions will not be replaced but augmented by generative AI, as humans will maintain their competitive advantages in ingenuity, creativity, and knowledge. So we're not talking about using AI to replace people. We're using it to augment, make us better, smarter, faster, more agile, and more adaptable.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. The Terminator scared us all, but the
He's
fact
not
that
an AI. He's a weapon.
we've all seen the horror stories that AI is going to replace us, determine that we're a threat, and wipe us off the earth. But here's the good news.
Skynet!
Yeah, here's the good news. Right now, it's just a tool, and it's a fantastic one. This is something you can use to enhance productivity by letting your teams work faster and smarter, like you said. And while adoption is still growing, over a quarter of people surveyed said that leveraging AI is a top objective for 2025. And that's a big number.
Yeah, it is. And I think leveraging is the key word here. Not using it or, sticking some stuff in and copying and pasting it and just using it as is, but actually learning how to use it as it exists right now so that you can use it to become better.
Yeah, prompt writing. It's the future.
So also in the survey, people who are using generative AI on the job. So when you're looking at how many people said it enhanced team's productivity versus people who said it had no impact, the people who said it enhanced the team's productivity was twice as many as the naysayers. So clearly it works.
Certainly it has an impact, if that's how they worded it. I'll just say this. We use ChatGPT to help us outline this podcast episode. And it saves time. It really does.
So all of these things highlight a focus on efficiency, innovation, leadership alignment, and data-driven strategies to enhance internal communication effectiveness. If that's your takeaway, put that on the t-shirt and walk around the office. Right. Any other thoughts, Deb?
I think we'll see expanded focus on experience. This has been talked about for a few years, but I think it's still a big focus, whether that be employee experience, customer experience, visitor experience, student experience. There's an experience for every market.
Heck, even vendors, B2B businesses, even if you're dealing with resellers, that experience.
Yeah, and quite frankly, we're a software company. User experience is everything. So there are a lot of experiences out there, but when it comes to communications, I think experience means making it more than just read and do. This is why we're seeing more visual things, more podcasts, different ways to communicate that might appeal to different people. For employees, I think a lot of the employee experience focus means bringing together teams that might have worked separately in the past. Grab your HR, communications, marketing, if you've got a PR person, but you're also going to bring in the room safety managers, facility managers, maybe some C-suite folks. If you get them all in the room together, it's going to make for a more cohesive communication strategy. And like we talked about, it's all about that alignment across the organization.
Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of these things, we kind of built our corporations and corporate office structures on the factory structures that were already in place, organizational structures. So it made sense that, this group does this, you guys do this, you guys do this, we manage blah, blah, blah. And I think we're starting to see more and more that we can learn from each other. I know this sounds very hippy-dippy, but it's true. If I'm a communicator, it doesn't hurt me to know how we manufacture our product or what's going on the warehouse floor. It probably will at least give me some ideas as to how to communicate better with those particular people who are working that segment of the organization.
Yeah, and I think communicators are pretty well aware of what's going on, or in some of the worst circumstances, they're just given things to put out. And I think a lot of these ideas for getting everybody in the group, people bringing together people from different teams and things, they've been done for years on things like brainstorming products or, looking at process flows. And it's just about moving that over to the communications process. Like you said, getting communicators involved maybe earlier, maybe at a deeper level. But I think it will help instead of just receiving emails that say, put this out on the screens.
Right. Or if that is the organizational culture, one assumes that it comes from a comprehensive content strategy. And in order to make that comprehensive content strategy and the subsequent plan, you have to have broad and deep knowledge of all aspects of what your audience does on a day-to-day basis, or else how can you possibly communicate with them?
Yeah, and I'd say if you can't get all of those people together, everybody's busy, everybody does have their own job. So if you can't get them all together, if nothing else, when you put your strategy together, maybe you outline some of your content ideas, throw it out to the group. It could show some gaps to them. It could inspire them of, I didn't see that the safety manager's doing this. I could do the same thing for my team,
Right.
things like that. So there are a lot of different ways to do it, but it's all about getting feedback from as many people as you can.
Absolutely so. So let's end with this. When developing your 2025 communication strategy, what are some common mistakes to avoid?
I think having vague goals is a really bad one. You need to make those goals specific and time bound. One of the worst goals I've ever heard for a company is, we need more business. What you need.
Oh, really? Don't we all?
Right. What you need to say is, we want to increase education market share by 3% by the end of the second quarter of this year. It's about.
Right. Real specific with a deadline.
Yeah. I think at the same time, setting overly ambitious targets can be bad. And this is for communicators too. When you're looking at that data and analytics and those success measures, you need to set realistic goals that match your capacity. We talked about resources and budget. They're going to determine what you can do, and you're going to need to guide those into the most effective channels. We talked about audience alignment, so I think having a misguided focus is another sort of pitfall you want to avoid. You need to ensure that those goals align with where your audience consumes information. We talked a lot about different channels and different apps and different platforms and different mediums and methods. You need to know, how are people using things? How are people getting your communications and reacting to them? And, don't put all of your efforts into your intranet if no one's looking at it.
Right.
We've talked about budget and resources several times, but I will say that if you're working with inadequate capacity, that's a bomb right there. You got to have the right team, and you have to have the right skill set. When we talked about those kind of things, also consider training. I forgot to mention that before. Also, the sort of flip side to setting overly ambitious targets is not being ambitious enough.
Right.
I know.
But it's true. I
there's
think
no
it's
winning.
right. No, there is winning, and the winning is the middle way. Buddhists take note.
Yeah. I think you have to stretch your goals to drive innovation and growth. The last thing you want to do is be like, well, we managed to do this last year. Let's just match that. Always be winning, always be advancing.
Right.
And I think the last one, again, continuing a lot of the themes we've talked about, is if you're disconnected from leadership. And this is for the internal communications person or the digital signage manager. You can't be disconnected from leadership because you have to align your goals with their expectations. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of internal friction or just a bunch of, I hate to say it, sort of fluffy communications that aren't actually supporting the strategy.
Yeah, that's true. What we don't want is the digital signage or email equivalent of, the cat hanging in the tree. Hang in there. That's just a waste of everybody's time. That's not specific. It's certainly not time bound. Hang in there till the end of the week.
Right. Go ahead and just put that strength poster on the wall with the iceberg photo.
Right.
That'll take care of that. And then use your digital signs.
Hey, my employees are so engaged. Look at that.
Yeah, use your digital signs to actually put out things that matter.
Right, exactly so. So in conclusion, let me say, go out there and do some of your own poking around. You know your specific industry or sector better than we do. We're talking pretty generally here, top of funnel stuff. So go out there and see what communication pros in your field are focused on and what they're planning for the year. See how what they're talking about doing might apply to your organization and your strategies. And then once you've done that, and of course taken all the advice in this episode, Then you go ahead and create a clear, achievable goal list and communications strategy and plan so that you can achieve those goals.
I could not have said it better myself. We can just scrap the everything prior to that sentence.
The episode is 38 seconds long. Well, as always, super interesting. I love future casting stuff, and I like seeing where things are going. Again, thank you very much, Deb, for talking to me today on the podcast. I've been talking to Debbie DeWitt, Marketing Communications Manager for Visix, about internal communications trends for the upcoming year 2025.
Thanks, Derek. It's always fun to be here. I am also a total stats and survey nerd, so you know I enjoyed it.
That's right. And again, I remind you that you can follow along with a transcript of the conversation we just had on the Visix website, where a lot of those promised links will also be found. For more free stuff, head to resources on Visix.com for guides, videos, and more to help with your visual communications. Please subscribe and share, and contact us for information about our digital signage solutions.